Section 11.4, Solving Equations with the Addition Property. In this section, we are going to work on solving algebraic equations. We will start with one-step problems and move on to doing multi-step in the same problem. But before we start, let's talk about the difference between algebraic expressions and algebraic equations. An algebraic expression does not have an equal sign. It's just a mathematical idea written in symbols. For instance, if you have 7x plus 2, 7x plus 2 is an algebraic expression. It just means to take an unknown number, x, we don't know what it is, multiplied by 7, and then add 2. It can't be solved for x because x can be many different numbers. But if you have 7x plus 2 equals 9, now 7x plus 2 equals 9 is an algebraic equation. It's an algebraic equation because it has an equal sign and it can be solved for that variable of x. We can also determine, if you have an algebraic equation, whether or not a number is a solution for that equation. So, in the equation that I have, 7x plus 2 equals 9, does x equal 0? Is that a possibility? Well, in order to find out, I can put 0 in where my x is and see if it works. 7 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 2 gives me 2. And 2 does not equal 9. So 0 is not a solution for that. How about, can x be equal to 1? Does x equal 1? Well, I'm going to do the same thing, but this time I'm going to put 1 in for that x. 7 times 1 is 7. 7 plus 2 equals 9. So, yes, 1 is a solution for that equation. Here's another example. I have the equation 4x subtract 5 equals 2x plus 3. If I wanted to, I could find out whether or not certain numbers are a solution for that. Let's say the number 4. Is the number 4 a solution for that equation? In order to find out, I'm going to put 4 wherever my x is in my equation, and I'm going to solve. So that would mean I have 4 times 4 subtract 5 equal to 2 times 4 plus 3. If I go through and solve this, 4 times 4 gives me 16. 16 minus 5 gives me 11 on the left-hand side of that equation. On the right-hand side, 2 times 4 gives me 8. 8 plus 3 also gives me 11. So, yes, 4 is a solution for that equation. One thing you do need to be able to do in this section is to see whether or not a solution works for a given equation. So let's talk about solving equations. Here I have the equation x plus 9 is equal to 11. What's x equal to? You probably already are looking at that and saying, well, obviously x is equal to 2 because 2 plus 9 equals 11. And that's true, but it's important that we go through certain steps, especially early on, because later on the equations will get much more difficult. In order to solve an equation, what you want to do is you want to get the variable, in this case x, all by itself on one side of the equal sign. So in order to do that, I'm going to do the opposite of what I am doing to the x on the left-hand side. It says x add 9. Well, if I subtract 9 from that left-hand side, I'm going to be getting rid of that. But this is what's important. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So I'm going to show that I am subtracting 9 from both sides. When I do that, I get x on the left-hand side because plus 9 subtract 9 cancel out, and 11 minus 9 gives me 2. So my final answer is 2. Then I can put it back in to check if it works, and as we said, it does. Let's go through and do another one. Here I have x subtract 4 is equal to 6. If I want to solve that for x, I'm going to get rid of the subtract 4 by adding 4 to the left-hand side. If I add 4 to the left-hand side, I have to add 4 to the right-hand side. Now, x subtract 4 add 4 cancels out. I'm just left with x on the left-hand side. 6 plus 4 equals 10, so x is equal to 10. Once again, I can put it back into the original equation and see if it works. In the first two problems I gave you, I had the x on the left-hand side, but it doesn't have to be on the left-hand side. 11 is equal to x plus 5. Once again, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I want to get that x all by itself. So I am going to subtract 5 from both sides. When I subtract 5 from the left-hand side, I get 6. When I subtract 5 from the right-hand side, the plus 5 subtract 5 cancel each other out. I'm just left with x. So x is equal to 6. Let's take a look at one that has x's on both sides. Here I have 4x is equal to 3x plus 4. Remember, the rule for solving equations is you want to get the variable, in this case x again, all by itself on one side of the equation. And right now I have x's on both sides of the equation. So I need to combine those x's. So in order to do that, I'm going to subtract 3x from the right-hand side. When I do that, I also have to subtract 3x from the left-hand side. 4x subtract 3x on the left-hand side just gives me 1x, or x. And on the right-hand side, 3x minus 3x cancels each other out, and I'm just left with 4. So the final answer to this is 4. Remember, whenever you're doing this, you want to always put in the answer and see whether or not it works in the original equation. So if I put a 4 in the left-hand side here, 4 times 4 gives me 16. If I put a 4 in the right-hand side, 3 times 4 gives me 12. 12 plus 4 does give me 16. So I know that 4 is a solution for that equation. Here's another one, and once again I have x's on both sides. So I want to get the x's together on the same side. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take 7x away from the right-hand side. When I do that, I'm going to get rid of the x on the right-hand side, but I also have to take 7x away on the left-hand side. Now I am going to go through and simplify each side. 8x subtract 7x gives me 1x, or just x, but I still have plus 5 on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, 7x subtract 7x gets rid of that, and I am left with, and this is important, that is, it says subtract 2. It's really minus 2, because that 7x minus 7x gave me a 0, and 0 subtract 2 gives me a negative 2. Now I want to go through and I want to solve that still for x. I need to get the x all by itself. So I'm going to subtract 5 from the left-hand side. I also have to subtract 5 from the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, the plus 5 and the subtract 5 cancel each other out. I'm just left with x on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, negative 2 subtract 5 gives me a negative 7. So my answer is a negative 7. Once again, it would be important to go back and just check and make sure, does negative 7 work in that original equation? And if you do that, you will find out that it does. Here's another example that's a little bit longer. You can see that on the left-hand side, I have 5x plus 9 plus 4x. One of the things that you need to do whenever you're solving equations is, first of all, see if you can simplify either of the two sides. And I can, because I have a 5x plus a 4x. I can combine those terms because those are like terms. So I'm going to rewrite that left-hand side. 5x plus 4x gives me 9x. I have 9x plus 9. I cannot combine the 9x and the 9 because those are not like terms. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I have some like terms. I just have some constants. 9 subtract 7. Well, 9 subtract 7 gives me 2. So I can combine those and I have 2 plus 8x. Now, after I've combined the like terms, now I'm going to go through and I'm going to work on getting the x's on the same side. So as I do that, first thing that I would do is to subtract 8x from the right-hand side because I want to get rid of the x's on both sides. If I subtract 8x from that side, I'm going to also subtract 8x on the left-hand side. 9x subtract 8x gives me 1x. I'm just going to write it as x, and I have x plus 9 on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, the plus 8x and the subtract 8x cancel each other out. I'm just left with 2. Now I'm down to x plus 9 is equal to 2. I want to get that x all by itself. So I'm going to subtract 9 from the left-hand side, also subtract 9 from the right-hand side. The 9's cancel out. On the left-hand side, I'm just left with x, and on the right-hand side, 2 subtract 9 gives me a negative 7. So the final answer to this is negative 7. And once again, I would go back to the original equation, put negative 7 in for x on both sides, for my x's on both sides, and solve it and make sure that it does work. Although solving equations can really be done many different ways, these 3 steps will work when solving an equation. First, simplify both sides of the equation if needed by combining like terms. Second, work on getting the terms with the variable, usually the x, on the same side of the equation. And third, work on getting the constants on the same side of the equation. And that way you will be able to isolate the x all by itself. So here is another example of a problem that we will work on. 5 plus 8x subtract 2 equals 2x subtract 3 plus 5x. If you want to, you could turn this off, solve that on your own by following these 3 steps, and then turn it back on again and watch me. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to go through and do that. I am going to do the first step here. Simplify both sides of the equation if needed by combining like terms. So I'm taking a look at the left-hand side, and I do see that I have some like terms. I have some constants. 5 subtract 2. Well, 5 subtract 2 gives me 3, so I can simplify that left-hand side. It is 3 plus 8x. On the right-hand side, I also have some like terms, 2x plus 5x. 2x plus 5x gives me 7x. So I have 7x subtract 3. Now I'm going to work on getting the terms with the variable, usually the x, on the same side of the equation. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to subtract 7x from the right-hand side of the equation so I can get rid of the x on that side. When I do that, I have to subtract 7x on the left-hand side. And now I'm going to go through and I'm going to simplify. So I have 3 plus 8x subtract 7x gives me just x. It could be 1x, but it'd probably be better just to write it as 3 plus x equals. The 7x subtract 7x on the right-hand side cancel each other out, and I'm left with negative 3. Remember, that's very important because 7x minus 7x really gave me a 0. So I had 0 subtract 3, which gives me that negative 3. Now I want to work on getting the constants on the same side. On the left-hand side, I do have a constant plus the variable, 3 plus x, so I am going to get rid of it. I am going to subtract 3 from that side. If I subtract 3 from the left-hand side, I have to subtract 3 from the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, 3 subtract 3 cancels. I'm just left with x. On the right-hand side, negative 3 subtract 3 gives me a negative 6. So the answer to this is a negative 6. Once again, I can go back through and put negative 6 in for all the x's in my original equation and make sure that both sides are equal. And if you do that, you will find that that is true. If you have never done algebra before, or if it has been a long time since you have done these types of problems, you may need to spend a good amount of time working in this section. As always, please ask me questions as you have them. Thank you.